What is happening, you beautiful bastards? Welcome back to another week. This week, we have a fantastic guest. Her name is Nancy East. But before we talk about Nancy, we have a few things to talk about. For one, Jerry was overloaded with dicks.
Yes, and YouTube wasn't happy. We got in some trouble. It's only a 1 week suspension, but even now we found out that even if you blur it out, you can't put dicks on YouTube.
Yep, they don't. So, I could fucking swing my ass, twerk my ass all day long, but any dicks is a no-no.
It's just a dick. So, if you read the guidelines on YouTube, it says you're not allowed to have any nudity for sexual gratification. Now, the video that we had, the dicks were getting shot off. To me, that's not sexual gratification. I don't know about you guys, but
it might be to someone.
Either way, we are temporarily suspended. We'll be back on YouTube. Actually, with this episode later in the week.
Is that when we're back up?
Yeah, at the end of this coming week. So this will go live on all the podcast services. Then towards the end of the week, it'll show up on YouTube.
But you will also be seeing the Matrix episode as well. So for all those who were wondering all the stuff we were referring in the episode, you'll be able to finally see it, except for the dicks.
Yeah, the dicks even blurred out. I appealed it. It's too sexually gratifying. So, but on top of that, something interesting happened. Guys, I went 2 years and I finally caught COVID.
Look at him.
Let me just, I may look just as beautiful as usual, but let me tell you, the mind-numbing, blindingly powerful pain that I was in was very unpleasant, and I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I would say definitely a 2 out of 5 stars for sure.
I had to look up. I think people are actually drinking their own urine now.
I don't see how that would help. I definitely never had the urge to do that.
Well, so my question is, would you have drinking your own urine to stop the pain?
Honestly, I had zero congestion when I was in pain, and I was so thankful that it was pain and not congestion.
Really?
Yeah. Like the pain was definitely a 10 out of 10, and it was spinal. I felt like I had meningitis, and then every bone in my body was in just mind-numbing pain.
Jerry was so upset that he couldn't put the dicks on YouTube. He just went out and licked every handle in a public, bus station.
Yeah, I was protesting. But anyway, on to the guest, Nancy East.
Yes, so, Nancy deserves much better than this.
That was just an update for you listeners. So Nancy East, if you are a fan of hiking and a fan of not dying, this is an episode for you. Chris, what is she all about?
Well, Nancy she's a big hiker, but she's also part of a search and rescue in the Smoky Mountains.
Yeah.
Right? Smoky Mountain area?
On the North Carolina side.
Yes. And she did some ridiculous, what was it? How many? 936 or 46 miles?
Say somewhere between 946 and 958. I can never remember the exact number.
Yeah, we are even through the episode, folks. Jerry couldn't remember. But that's a lot of hiking. And she's got some fascinating stories about, people going off trails for dumb reasons or whatever, and things that might keep you alive when you're on your next hike. Exactly.
We talk about her adventure on this 900 plus mile trip, which was the fastest one on record, right? For hiking all the trails.
And she was actually delayed a day too.
Yep. And on top of that, she goes over, some of her more harrowing experiences with rescuing people, some of the crazy things that she ran into. I think you guys are going to like it. Let's go check it out.
What is happening, you beautiful bastards?
So, Nancy, I heard that you are the fastest hiker in the Smoky Mountains.
Currently, yes. Maybe not fastest by speed, but as far as endurance and covering all the trails, yeah, I got that record right now.
Now, I've never been to the Smoky Mountains. I've gone down as far as, I think, Raleigh. That's as close to Smokies as I've gone. How many miles are the trails that you had to do?
That's a kind of a two-part answer. There are about 800 miles of open trail
Damn.
right now in the park. And you can imagine just, a national park trail network. It's not linear like the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah.
It's very convoluted because they all connect and interweave with each other. So by the time you finish hiking them all, the most efficient, I think, that anyone has ever done it is like 920-ish miles, maybe somewhere in the teens, but 915 or so. But it usually takes well over 1,000 miles to hike them. When I set the speed record, I did it with a good friend of mine, but we did it in 29 days, and our mileage ended up being just under 950, so it was 948.
That's a lot of miles in 29 days.
Yeah. Was that consecutive 29 days that you guys were out in the woods?
It was, yeah. We didn't take a single day off. So that was all hiking, averaged, I think, about 32 miles a day. And I think our elevation gain over all of the miles was like 162,000 feet. So it was a lot.
Now, did you get into the hiking before search and rescue stuff, or did you get into search and rescue after hiking?
No, search and rescue came long before. Well, actually, hiking in general, I was into hiking since college. I've been into hiking and backpacking since the late 90s, I guess.
Mhm.
And I moved up to Western North Carolina to be closer to this park. I love the Smokies, just love Southern Appalachia. And then I joined a search and rescue team, I guess about 6 years ago. Just here in my county. It's one of the busiest search and rescue teams in the state. So we definitely get out there a lot and go help people.
How often do you get called out on the regular?
I would say it averages, it's so unpredictable. Some months we'll get called out, 10 times, and some it'll just be dead quiet. So it's not very consistently predictable, but on average, I think we usually respond to about 3 to 4 per month on average each year.
I gotta imagine some seasons are worse than others. I gotta imagine the summer months are brutal.
It is. Usually summer, though, oddly, is not our busiest month. It usually is fall because all the leaves fall and they obscure the trail, and the days are shorter, so people don't have as much time to figure out where they went wrong. So we get a lot of panic calls that, it's getting cold, it's getting dark, what do I do? Or somebody just doesn't come home, and we go look for somebody who should have been home hours ago.
Now, the majority of them, are they usually pretty quick pickups? Do you find them pretty quick with technology nowadays, or how's that go?
Yeah, that's hit or miss. Most of the time, yes. It depends on where they are. With more and more cell towers going up, it's a lot easier for people to get lost and figure out where they are because they can have an app downloaded on their phone and figure it out, even if they're on airplane mode. But if they do get turned around and say their phone dies, even if they have reception, that's when they wind up in a pickle. And so we always try to recommend to people, always carry that paper map and compass just in case. But yeah, some of them can get drawn out multiple days, sometimes upwards of a week. I'm not sure what the longest is that we've had. I think it's probably been about a week. Obviously, not all of them end well when they go on that long, but a lot of them do. I'm amazed, just the capacity for just enduring and surviving when push comes to shove. People really can bring it when they need to, even if they have no experience.
And did you run into any trouble when you were doing your, was it 900, how many miles now?
It was 948 miles total.
So 948 miles is a lot of time in the woods for anybody. Did you run into any kind of trouble that a less experienced hiker would have been, maybe doomed if they ran into that?
No, nothing in particular. I mean, I had an injury along the way that I had to get treated, but I could still hike out. I wasn't completely debilitated. Certainly a lot of what we do is carry people out of the woods on a litter. But no, I mean, we know the Smokies so well. We had both hiked all the trails multiple times, so that wasn't an issue. But I can't think of anything that we ran into specifically that somebody else would have been really in a pinch, unless they had done things that we chose not to do, like ford really dangerous streams, that kind of thing. We were wise and just experienced enough to not do those kinds of things.
What does the preparation look like for such an intense hike? Because the longest hike I've ever done was maybe 8 hours.
Yeah, it really varies on how much time you have. I'm a mom to 3 kids and a wife and busy, just life with all that. So for me, it looked like going out twice a week on 30 to 40-mile day hikes and then coming home, recovering for a day, then doing some weight training, and then going back out and doing the 30 to 40-mile day hike again. Over and over. I did that week after week for close to a year. And my hiking partner, friend, he went out and hiked the whole Pacific Crest Trail. That was kind of his training ground, was doing that. And then coming home, and then we trained together. We got a little bit sidelined. The pandemic slowed us down just because the park closed, everything shut down. So we couldn't go out there when we thought. So we had 5 extra months of training, which really wound up to our benefit, I think, just for me in particular, just because it helped my body develop more muscle memory for what we were about to do.
Did you find when you went out that you had adequately trained, or was there things that you still would have liked to have trained better?
No, I can't think of anything that I would have done differently other than just going out more had I had the time, but then I may have overtrained. It's hard to say. I picked up an injury the first week, and I think it was just an overuse injury. My body had just never been exposed to this kind of rigor before, and we had practiced our first 5 days of routes prior to starting, thinking that'll be a good trial run. It was our 5 heaviest loaded days mileage-wise. But I still picked up that injury, and it was just a pulled quad that it let up, but I did have to go get some treatment one night. I met a friend of mine who's a physical therapist, and he did some dry needling and e-stim, and that got me in good shape again. But yeah, it was a little hit or miss for a couple of days. I wasn't sure if I could keep up with Chris, my friend, just because I was a lot slower as it healed.
And how long did it take it to heal up for you?
It took, I'd say, a good week before I could actually squat and pee again. That was kind of my litmus test for it.
That was a deciding factor.
It was, because every time I'd squat, it would just kind of seize up. And so as soon as I could squat and hide from people again, I thought, okay, it's getting better. But I was taped up. I had some therapy going on that helped, improve everything more quickly and just to stabilize the muscles around it.
Now, Grizz and I are up here in New England, so we have a lot of trails too. And you mentioned the pandemic kind of messed with your timing a little bit. What I found kind of interesting up here in this area was that I think it might have been because of the pandemic. I'm not really sure. That seems to be the only thing that was different, but there were a lot more people in the woods every time I went out during the pandemic. Even people that had never been to the woods before, I guess they had nothing else to do. So did that kind of make it less solitary while you guys were out there? You see a lot of that too?
We did. Yeah, we actually came across a lot of people who had no experience whatsoever. They were just stir crazy, as everybody was, from being quarantined and staying close to home. So yeah, there were record numbers in the Smokies that particular year. And we came across quite a few people that even during our training that we ended up helping, just giving like electrolyte tablets because they were really bonked, because they were dehydrated and needed the electrolyte replacement as much as the water. People who were using navigational apps who had never even opened them till they got on trail, and they had no idea what they were doing. So we would give them quick little tutorials. I even came across 2 teenage boys in the woods as I was training who were out with a school group. They had run ahead of their mentors and gotten lost. And so I helped them get out. But it was a cold, wintry day. It was, it was like, I'd say high 30s, low 40s, and raining. So just perfect conditions for death. But they came across me and said that I looked like I knew what I was doing because I had hiking poles. So they trusted me enough to get them out. And yeah, I get a little fearful thinking what could have happened to those boys had they not come across me, because there was nobody out on the trails that day. I'm not sure why they even were, other than their school was a boarding school. They were going a little crazy with the boys.
I also imagine, like, technology is great, and if anyone's gone hiking with that stuff, it's awesome. But you can rely on it a little too much, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, you're not bringing all those necessary things that you should bring, and next thing you know, you're turned around, and God knows where you got to go. And with that many trails around there, I gotta imagine that happens a lot.
It does. Yeah, it really does. And people, I think, take for granted that even if it's a popular trail, if it's close to civilization, all that, they just think that they're going to have cell reception or somebody's going to be out there to help them just pronto. They don't realize that search and rescue teams are all volunteer almost everywhere, it seems. I mean, rescue squads certainly have paid personnel, but the wilderness search and rescue component, they're typically volunteers. So it takes us a while to mobilize, to drop the rest of what we're doing and get out there to help people. And that's certainly the case in the Smokies. And actually, the speed record was the catalyst for it was a tragic search that we had. And there was a death of a hiker from Ohio, a 52-year-old woman who got lost less than a mile from the trailhead on one of the most popular trails in the park. And that was just one of the most tragic things that I had ever experienced, because we searched for her for a week and found her body in a creek drainage, partially unclothed, and she had died of exposure. And one of the people or things that people do when they are nearing death with hypothermia, which obviously cold body temperature, is they take off their clothes because their body, it tricks them into thinking they're hot. They think they have just this massive rush of blood to the surface of their skin, and it just kind of causes a hot flash. And they remove clothing. But that's how we found her. And it was just unbelievably tragic and so preventable. So the whole speed record was in the name of a cause. I wanted to raise money to prevent anyone dying like that again, just with more proper education and knowledge coming into the park.
I mean, that's a pretty noble cause to go out there for. What is how, like, when someone gets lost, is it just, hey, we haven't seen them in 24 hours, or how do you get alerted?
Yeah, that varies. In that particular situation, this woman was hiking with her daughter. She was a young adult, and they were almost back to the trailhead, about 9/10 of a mile from it. And the daughter said, I'd like to go to the summit of this mountain where there's an observation tower. It's called Klingman's Dome. And she said, and we'll just meet back at the car if that's okay. I mean, it seemed simple enough. And Susan, her mother, said, yeah, go ahead. I'll meet you back in 30 minutes or so, I guess. And she never showed up. Susan never showed up. So the daughter got back to the car, kept waiting and waiting. Good Samaritan actually ran down the trail looking for the mother, never found her, because she was basically, we think she'd missed the turnoff for the parking lot. There's a spur trail to the parking lot, and she had just bypassed it, probably distracted, looking down at the trail. And yeah, so that's, in her case, it was that quick that teams were mobilized, but she still wasn't found in time. But oftentimes it's somebody doesn't come home. A wife is getting worried. Her husband should have been home by 8 and it's now 11 o'clock. A lot of times it's people they get a pocket of cell reception and they call 911. And usually what happens is those towers, the cell towers, are triangulated, and it gives us a much more narrow scope of where to go look for somebody. But oftentimes they don't triangulate quite as well as they should. So it can be miles from where they're actually lost. So that's hit or miss too.
Normally when you do it, how big's the search grid they put you out on?
Usually what happens first is a hasty search. And that just means that we take the information that we know. If we know the trailhead they started, or if a sheriff's deputy goes out and finds the car, a lot of times we don't even know where someone started if they didn't leave an itinerary with a loved one back home. So the sheriff's deputy will go chase down the car, and that's, kind of ground zero. And then we fan out from there and try to contain them. Sometimes we'll always send a team from that trailhead, but then we look at a map and send people from other trails that might bisect or come across that trail at some point. And then if there are user trails that people have created over the years in wilderness areas, we'll run those too. Just knowing that people, especially if they're not familiar with the area, will sometimes go down one of those and not really even knowing it's not a trail. And a user trail is just a trail that people have created over the years by going to a scenic viewpoint or taking a shortcut through a switchback, or 100 different ways that they can be created. But they're very common in this area. So that's a real common way people get lost, is they still think they're on a trail and all of a sudden they're not, and it's gotten dark.
Yeah, I think people often, especially if they haven't spent a lot of time in the woods, they could take for granted how easy it is to get lost. It's not as simple as walk back in the direction you came from. I have been hiking since I was probably 6 years old. And I think it was like 3 years ago, I went hunting on a 10-acre plot that bordered like a state forest that I had been to before. And I just happened to get distracted down in a valley following a deer trail. And I looked up and there happened to be overcast sky and everything was uphill in every direction. So I had no idea which way I came from. And even being in the woods a lot and being in that particular area, it took me 2 hours to figure out where I came from, because if you've never been in the woods, once you get there and you leave a trail, trees have a habit of looking the same. So it takes you quite a while to figure out how to get back to civilization. I ended up getting lucky and finding a stone wall, and typically stone walls lead to something. So I just walked back roughly in the direction that I thought I came from. I didn't end up where I belonged, but I ended up back on a road.
Yes, I've done the same thing, a very familiar thing. Yeah, where I've wound up where I know where I am. It's just not where I should be. So yeah, it happens to the best of us. So yeah, it's a very common thing, more so than people think. But I bet my guess is that you probably kept your cool, kept your wits about you, and didn't panic. And that really played into your success in finding your way out.
Oh, sure. That's definitely true. If I panicked, I probably would have been in trouble. My real life reaction was I was just incredibly irritated that now I had to figure out how to get back.
Yes,
exactly. If you've ever gone hiking with your kids, though, and all of a sudden you know where you're at, but your kids are clueless all of a sudden, it's easy to see what happens when people panic, because all of a sudden they from 0 to 100 and they're going, wait a minute, where are we going? This isn't the way we're going. And they just lose their mind and start heading off in a different direction.
It's so true. Yeah. We try to teach an acronym when we do talks or search and rescue. STOP is the word, and it stands for stop, think, observe, and plan. And just really make yourself stop and just chill out, sit down, have a snack. Just don't start wandering willy-nilly. You're just a proverbial needle in a haystack as soon as you start moving from that point where you're just not real sure what happened. I even tell people, go as far as carrying something like a bright bandana, just a really loud fluorescent bandana, tie it to a tree, somewhere where you can see it. And even from that point where I got mixed up somewhere, I'm just not real sure where, but tie that bandana and go out like spokes on a wheel. From that point where you can still see the bandana, but maybe just get a bearing of where you may have gotten turned around from that point. Because a lot of times you're not too far from where you should be, especially if you're kind of just in tune with how far you've gone before you realize this isn't where I'm supposed to be.
Especially around our area, I would say a lot of the hiking trails and stuff aren't even remotely close to the acreage that you're dealing with. I mean, ours might be 100, maybe 150, 200 acres, but that's it. And, you can get lost in 200 acres, but how much is Smoky Mountains?
It's 500,000 acres. So
yeah, exactly. Like,
yeah.
Get lost real easy.
Very easy for days. Yes.
Oh my God. And everything around us is very clearly marked, right? They've either painted trees or put notched in trees and everything. I'm sure a lot of the trails are marked for you as well, but you said you have crazy amounts of just user trails that people have made. And if there's that much land, how many just random trails go off? And even when you did your 900 and you said 48, I'm gonna mess that number up.
No, you're good. That's it.
Did you touch all the user trails that you could, or was that just the main stuff?
Yeah, just the main stuff. And to be clear, the Smokies is actually great about not having too many user trails. They're out there, but they have such great signage that people don't get lost quite as frequently there. But in Pisgah National Forest, which is here in Haywood County where I live, it's the home of Shining Rock and Middle Prong Wilderness, just incredibly popular areas that people come from all over to experience because they're phenomenal. But they're designated wilderness areas. And the Wilderness Act basically says you can't put a lot of signage in these wilderness areas. You can't blaze the trees like you can along the Appalachian Trail. All these things are put into place to preserve it in its most pristine and natural state that it can be in. But it can sometimes be a detriment to the people who are visiting who don't really know where they're, headed or just aren't familiar with it. Even with people who have apps that they know how to use, a map and compass, they can still get turned around. They just know how to figure it out if they're knowledgeable.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. I don't think I even have anything besides Google Maps on my phone. I've never even used it to see if it works in the woods. Is that something that people commonly do? Something like that?
All trails, man.
Yeah, all trails is good.
All trails is the one.
All trails, you have to be careful though. I like all trails to research trails. I don't love it for navigation. And the reason why is because it's so largely crowdsourced, meaning that everybody just uploads their track into that platform.
That's
so
true.
if they get screwed up, you're going to see the screw up. All Trails has gotten a lot better about catching those and, correcting the tracks that aren't the ones they should be, but they don't catch them all. So we go out and look for people who have tried to follow All Trails more often than if people use Gaia, for say, GAIA is the name of the other app. That's the one I like. It's a little more consistently reliable, in my opinion. They work the same way. They're both, the same type of technology, but Gaia to me is a little bit more solid for actual navigation.
Now with Gaia, do you still need reception though? Do you need GPS?
Nope. You can put it on airplane mode. You do have to download maps of areas before you go out. And it's just like All Trails. They have a free plan, which is very limited. And then you can pay to get more robust features and overlays and just more information at your fingertips. But even the free plan is fine. They're going to have the overlay of those trails, the network of trails. It's just if you're looking at a track and trying to follow it, I would trust Gaia way more than I would All Trails most of the time.
I mean, if I'm hitting a trail of that size, I'm bringing a map. I mean, I'll bring my phone, but I'm bringing a map.
Yeah, good for you. I love hearing that. Yeah, and and that's a lost art, especially with kids these days.
Absolutely.
Everything is just digital to them. But yeah, I love pulling out maps. I still keep an atlas in my car, and my kids make fun of me. But I think there's so much value in having that paper copy of something in your hand if you're turned around somewhere.
We had a guest on not too long ago who literally didn't know how people used to get around. They were questioning, like, how the hell did you figure out where you were going? It's like, we had these books that were full of maps, and you'd figure out, like, oh, this street, I need to turn here.
It's
like,
so true. Yeah. And when you don't have reception in your car and you're, bound to that again, it really brings to light how important it is. My kids make a lot of fun of me, but that's okay. I get out of a bind if we're in one in some strange, rural setting and we can't find our way out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've actually, I haven't gone over how to use a map book with my kids, but as they get older, I'll be doing that because Grizz and I, as you just mentioned, came up without smartphones. And if you can't use a map, what are you going to do when the apocalypse hits?
Like next week.
Right. Seriously.
Now, what would you recommend to people for when they go on hiking? It was like an absolute must be carry kit.
Yeah, I would say Google the 10 essentials, and that's going to give you everything you need. And a lot of people look at that list and they initially think,
laugh.
oh my God, I'm not backpacking. I'm not going to feel like a pack mule out on a 5-mile day hike. You don't have to feel like one. You don't have to weigh yourself down with everything on that list because it's all little stuff. It's all lightweight things. For instance, an emergency shelter. People tend to think, oh my God, I've got to take my 5-pound tent. Not at all. Just take even something as simple as a trash compactor bag or a black, 30-gallon trash bag and use that as your shelter. In a pinch, you can take, a pocket knife and cut a slit on the side of it, put it over your head and have a complete, shelter that you've got a little air hole for your face, but you could hunker down and wait out some help in that. If you've got extra layers and rain gear to wear underneath that, it's going to help you. And those are things that are on the essentials list too, extra clothing, rain gear, just protective gear from the elements. Just none of those things has to weigh very much, and it can be really inexpensive. I'm trying to think of the other things on the list: headlamp or just illumination, a light source. A headlamp weighs next to nothing, a couple of ounces. Fire starting materials. That's one thing that a lot of people don't bring on a day hike because they think, I'm not going to be out overnight. Why would I need to build a fire? I guarantee that fire could save your life. We actually had an interesting rescue here in Haywood County one winter. It was a day, it was probably in the 40s when these two guys, they came over from Charlotte, they were in college and set out on a loop trail. Didn't tell anybody where they were going. They actually found this trail on All Trails. This was a good All Trails example of how they got turned around. But they got a little turned around. All Trails wasn't quite leading them where they needed to be. So they got stuck out after dark, had nothing. I mean, just hardly had anything more than a few snacks, an extra layer, but they did have a lighter because one of them smoked. And so that lighter saved their life because the next day we had a massive snowstorm blow in. Temperatures were down in the teens, in the negative values with wind chill. they would have certainly died without that lighter. And it still took us 3 days to find them, just because it was so hazardous for us to go in. It was a slow endeavor to find them, and they had to be extracted with a Black Hawk. I mean, it was just that crazy of a rescue. But thank God they had that lighter, because they would have died the first night without a doubt. There's no way they could have survived the conditions they were in, and they barely did. Even with the lighter, they had a hard time keeping the fire going with the wind. But yeah, just
that wet wood.
What was that?
I said that in wet wood.
And wet wood, yeah, God love them. They tried to, I don't know why they chose the biggest tree in the forest, but they tried to light the biggest hemlock you've ever seen on fire. We actually went out and looked at, like, kind of, we tried to retrace their path, how they got turned around, and we found the tree that they tried to light on fire. It had a big black scar on it, but yeah, that thing was not going to burn. So
now, is that something that you do with everyone that you have to rescue? Is you try and retrace how they got there?
A lot of times, yes. Not everybody on our team geeks out on this kind of data like I do, but me and a few others just really are fascinated with where the psychology of things, where people went wrong. We always like to interview people after they're found, whether it's months later after they recover from an injury or whatnot, or right there on the spot, and just ask, what happened? Where did you get lost? How, what did you do when you got lost? Because all that stuff, we just kind of collate that data and then try to use it for teaching purposes later on when we're telling people stories like this. Because in the case of, well, actually, this guy's name that got lost that I just told you about, his name, ironically, was David Crockett, and he would not mind me sharing his name. He's very vocal and verbal, open about his story now. But yeah, we love to learn from all of these if we can, because it just helps us to do more educational presentations in the future, to know where people went wrong and what they thought when they did.
Is most of them just, they were distracted on the trail, paying attention to something else, and next thing they know, they were off?
Yeah, sometimes they'll think, oh, I'm going to go out to that viewpoint or that waterfall. It doesn't look that far on the map. And all of a sudden, they're 3 miles to get to that waterfall or whatever it is, the feature they wanted to see. And it gets dark on them, and they, don't have a headlamp. Again, they weren't expecting to be out overnight, but they have cell reception, thankfully. So they'll call. And a lot of these we can actually, if they say, I'm at Yellowstone Falls, we can say, oh, we know exactly how to walk you out. But of course, if they don't have a light source, it's too dangerous. So we know where to go meet them, though, exactly where they are. So those are always easy, just short, quick, out and back, get them and grab them and go. But yeah, it just depends on the situation. Again, most of the time, I'd say the two most common things are, one, lack of humility for the backcountry, just not understanding how dangerous of a place it really is. And just having a disregard for that, scaling the side of a waterfall or getting too close to a cliff edge for a selfie or those kinds of things. And then the other is just people not understanding the apps that they bring, or their phone dying. That's a really big common one, because people forget to put their phone in airplane mode, and then it's dead, and they have no idea where they are, and they're on vacation, so they have no familiarity with the area. And those are usually the trickiest ones, because nobody typically knows that they're even on a hike. Sometimes if they're on a vacation with a family and some of the families stay back home, they'll know to call. But yeah, there's just such a myriad of reasons and ways that people get lost, but those are probably the two most common.
And what do you think is probably the most memorable rescue you've had?
The one I just told you about, David Crockett, that's a pretty historical one for our team. We talk about that one a lot. Gosh, I'm trying to think of some more uplifting ones that have happy endings, because the ones that are sad, they typically go on for a long time, and we find the body and they're etched in our minds and our hearts forever. Well, there's one that actually, it was what prompted me to get on the team. It was a district attorney. She came over from Tennessee to hike here in North Carolina and went up Cold Mountain. If you've ever heard of the movie Cold Mountain or the book Cold Mountain, this mountain is named after those two things are named after this mountain, but iconic place. So she went up for a day hike, pretty experienced hiker. She was coming back down, and she leaned against a tree just to rest for a minute. Well, the tree was dead, and it gave way with her weight, went careening down the mountainside, taking her with it. It was a really, really steep embankment, and it knocked her out. She had, I can't remember, all kinds of dislocations, like in her shoulder. I think her ankle was broken, some contusions, her head was injured. So she was immobile for 3 days. We almost didn't find her, or our team almost didn't find her. I wasn't a member yet, but it was all over the media because, of course, it had been 3 days. Her husband called and said she didn't come home. Everybody thought she had been abducted. But, finally they found her on the third night, but it was a really harrowing one because that night a cold front came in. I think it was like October, and she would have died had she not been found that night. She had been 3 days without water, pretty much unconscious, coming in and out of consciousness, and it got cold and rainy. So she would have certainly perished. But that was the one that woke me up to, number one, there was a search and rescue team here in my county, and two, that, bad shit happens sometimes. And even if you're prepared, which she was, things can happen, and you've just got to do the things you're supposed to do, but things can still go wrong. And she had done all the right things. She left the itinerary with her husband, seasoned hiker, knew what she was doing, knew she was within her, capabilities, all that, but something still went bad, and she had to be rescued.
She had enough injuries where it was bad enough she couldn't move, but a lot of times just a simple injury can be bad enough that it gets you turned around to where you don't even know where you're at.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, or slows people down significantly, and a lot of times people will have, it's almost always something on the lower extremities that happens, they twist their ankle or whatever, and then all of a sudden they can't get out in time. And we've had a lot of those where either we just go in and help walk them out if they can still walk, or carry them out if they can't be, walked out very easily.
My wife did that on a trail. She was on a trail and she actually tore her ACL on it. And she calls me and I'm at work, and she's just telling me that she's hurt herself. Okay, fine. We'll take care of that when we can. Well, now I can't find my way out. Well,
no.
Use your phone. Like, you're talking to me on it. It has battery. Use your phone. But I'm talking to you. You don't need to talk to me right now. Stop talking to me and use your phone. Like, it's just, she was hurt. So her brain would just went.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, you just default to that comfort zone. And that actually brings up a good point. A couple months ago, there was I think it was floating around on social media. It was a post that somebody made. It wasn't anybody qualified, and they certainly didn't know what they were talking about. But they said, if you ever break down or get lost at a trail or on a trail, I think it was to change the voicemail on your phone. So when you don't come home and somebody calls your phone to check on you, they're going to hear the voicemail that says, I'm lost, I need help. It was just ridiculous because, number one, if you don't have cell service, the voicemail won't upload to the server. And if you're ever lost, the first thing you should do is call 911. If you have a pocket of cell reception, don't call anybody else. Call 911 before you lose your food. Yeah.
And I think even then, I know text can be like, if you've ever been in an area with bad cell service and you try to make a phone call and it won't let you, a lot of times it'll let you do text, but it won't let you do a phone call. So even there, just shoot out a text to someone.
Yep. Shoot out a text with your coordinates. If you can look at Google Maps or whatever, share my location, that is gold to us. Yeah. If we have some semblance of an idea of where you are, that is so immensely helpful because you really can be a needle in a haystack pretty quick.
Yeah, I was going to say that reminds me of most of the high profile search and rescues that I see on the news. The person fell somewhere, like the woman that you're talking about. She fell down that embankment for who knows how far down she was. That seems like the most common thing for people that get rescued. How are they being found if they're that far down, out of view, and they don't have a phone or any way to contact somebody? Is there something they're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, in her case, it was tricky. And it's really just by the grace of God, she was found because they knew where she was supposed to be. So they at least had that. They knew she did an out and back to the summit of Cold Mountain. There are user trails because this isn't a designated wilderness area. And she was actually down one of those. I think that she had gone to pee or something, so that she had kind of scurried down one to do that. And that's where she fell or
the tree.
Went down with the tree. But it took a lot of, it just takes a lot of brain power at that point. We are so fortunate on our team. We have just a kick-ass leader who knows the mountains here like the back of his hand. He is so well versed in every trail, every user trail. He has, I think, a photographic memory. So he is such an asset because he can sit there and just his wheels turn. You can almost see it happening. And he will just almost intuitively think of where this person may have ended up that's not in a conventional place that we would look otherwise. And he's just almost dead on. It's amazing. So he was probably, I imagine, in that case, pretty instrumental in leading them down to the area again, because I know that they had already searched the area where she was found. Generally speaking, they had not searched that far off the ridge. And I think at that point, she heard them call when they did find her. She was barely conscious enough to answer out. And I think that was when they were able to locate her. At least they knew they were in the general spot at that point.
Now, when you guys go out, you do your hasty search first, but is it like an SOP that you have so many people go for the hasty search and then after that you get more, or is it just we throw everyone we have at it no matter what?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. No, it's really strategic. So yeah, it's usually just teams of 2 or 3, usually fit people who are capable of getting out there quick, because we're not sitting there looking for clues. We're not doing just a really granular search at that point. We're just going out there to run the trails as fast as we can, hiking, usually calling out their name. And yeah, I'd say 85% of the time, maybe even 90%, people are found during those hasty searches. That's the more common course. And another thing that I'm going to mention real quick, because I'll forget it, is the 10 essentials do not include a whistle. I don't know why they should, because that's such a key element to being found. I was thinking about a hasty search. It made me think of it. There was a kid and his parents who became lost. They went down a user trail and were turned around, but they knew to sit tight and wait. They weren't going to move. They were going to stay put, knowing that eventually somebody would come after them. And we did, but the way we found them was through this kid's whistle that he had learned to carry in Boy Scouts. So I always like to give him props, because his parents would have never carried it, but he thought to take it home or take it from home on the hike with them. And that was really helpful.
I know a lot of times they give you a whistle with a lot of outdoor gear now.
They do. A lot of packs have them on the sternum strap. You'll find them on the sternum strap, so you don't even need to carry one. Those aren't as wild as some of the other ones.
I would say a lot of them you can't even tell they're a whistle if you don't know what you're looking for. It looks like it's like the connector.
Yeah, it's tiny. Yeah, but
it has that little like cheesy compass with it that's completely useless.
Complete crap. Yes, for sure.
So we interrupted you, but you were going, after you do your hasty search and you send your 3 people out, at that point, if you don't find them, does it escalate and all of a sudden we have like 300 people, or?
Yeah, it depends on the stakes. Say it's a summertime search and the days are long and warm. We've got somebody experienced out there that we're looking for, who knows what to do. We just have a history of somebody who's experienced with carrying the right things. I mean, say, for instance, if I got lost, I always say it's almost a detriment when you're on a search and rescue team, because they're not going to be any hurry. They know that I'm going to be pretty self-sufficient for a while unless I'm injured. But, that's not quite as alarm sounding as, say, like the David Crockett search. When it was winter, a blizzard was coming. We knew that the stakes were really, really high. We had no idea where these boys were. That's when a lot of agencies get mobilized really fast. And it always starts with the sheriff's department. Any search in any county in the United States, I think almost unanimously starts with the sheriff's department, because we don't know sometimes if there's something malicious going on. Is this truly somebody who's lost or injured, or is it something nefarious? So they are always the first point of contact with 911, and then they call on us at that point. But then if it gets ramped up quickly because of conditions or experience level or child or someone with dementia, that kind of thing, a lot of agencies get pulled in from neighboring counties, and then sometimes it fans out from there even to neighboring states. So it just depends on all the parameters they're going into that particular search. But yeah, it can get ramped up really fast sometimes, especially with kids.
Oh, I bet. When they go to neighboring states, I gotta imagine sometimes that's great to have the numbers and maybe the equipment, but if they're not familiar with your trails or your area, couldn't that be a hindrance?
It can, yes. And it can be a hindrance too when you've got teams who are mishmashed, that don't know each other. There can sometimes just be some egos that get involved. I will say, as a woman, I'm a minority on a search and rescue team. Almost on any search and rescue team, women are going to be in the minority. And yeah, a lot of testosterone can get in play, and it can be a little, it can
flying through the air.
Yeah. So, but yeah, they typically, usually, unless it fans out into multi-state searches, the different counties that neighbor us, they all know the trails. I mean, they hike them as much as we do, just because it's, an area that everybody loves. But yeah, sometimes when you got, especially with dog teams, that type of thing, we'll have people from dog teams come from the coastal section of North Carolina over to our mountains. And those dogs aren't used to that, and neither are their trainers. And so they can really struggle sometimes just with what's being asked of their bodies, really. Even if they're in shape, they're just not used to it. And the dogs can sometimes really almost be a hindrance if they can't keep up. And we're trying to let the dogs do their thing and not mess with the scent and all that, but they can sometimes not be as efficient.
Now, Grizz, I don't know if you caught that. She mentioned how sketchy things get when it's colder weather. Just another example of why now I don't go outside in the winter.
It's really like Jerry and I have worked outside. We live in New England, so it's pretty cold, pretty wet in the winters. And if you've ever been out in not even snow isn't too bad, but if you've been out in the rain when it's in 30s and all of that, you
even
get
if it's
soaked
below
to the
50,
bone.
Grizz, if it's below 50 and you're outside,
that's true. It's true.
Not pleasant.
But if you get soaked to the bone, like to get that cold out, I love the cold. I'll go outside right now in shorts. I don't care. And I have more layers than Jerry does. But to get that cold out, you need heat, like bad. Yeah. You need a lot of heat.
Big time. And that's another thing people really underestimate is how fast your core body temperature starts that downward slope. And I'd rather be out in snow any day than 40-degree rain. It just is a much safer
Absolutely.
scenario.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah. And so people really underestimate. And your mental faculties, they go quickly with hypothermia, where you're just not thinking clearly. Your brain just gets foggy. You don't make good choices. And it just starts that downward spiral, I think, a lot faster. People don't realize when you're shivering, you're hypothermic. It's mild, but it's a slippery slope from that point on.
Yeah. And another thing I noticed that I don't really hike in the winter because, again, I hate being cold. But when I am outside, and when Grizz and I have been outside together and it's cold like that, one of the first things to happen is my hands don't work anymore. Like when you try to close them, it's slow motion. You have to wait for it to catch up to you. If you're out hiking, if you're not on a flat path, you're in trouble if your hands don't work.
Yep.
Yeah, mine become almost arthritic. It's just like painful.
Absolutely. And I always tell people the best way to warm them back up again, and I do this all the time, especially with search and rescue, where we're trying to, we're dealing sometimes with technical equipment, is to put them in your armpits, just skin against skin. It works like a charm. Even when the rest of your body just still feels cold, those armpits are usually warm enough to get you warm back up quicker than you might realize, and enough to at least do whatever with dexterity, zip a zipper or put a stake in the ground for a tent or whatever. And hand warmers, those little chemical hand warmers that are so cheap, those are also good insurance in the winter.
Jumping jacks.
And jumping jacks, yes, anything that you can just get your blood flowing for sure. But yeah, I have a hard time getting my hands warm, even with motion. So, but yeah, the armpit trick works like a charm.
Now, we've kind of talked about the negatives of hiking, but you said that Smoky Mountain is your favorite place to hike. Have you gone nationwide all over the place, or just mostly East Coast?
Yeah, I mean, the East Coast is home, so certainly this is where I've covered the most ground, but every year I do what's called a mom-batical. It's like a little miniature sabbatical for a week, where I go out west usually last year I went to Oregon. Some years I'll go to Colorado, California, just all over the West, and just take a week to 10 days to hike some form of trail over there. Oftentimes I'll look for something that, like the Wonderland Trail around Mount Rainier. It's 100 miles, so it's easy to knock out in a week to 10 days if you're, in decent enough shape to do it. So yeah, I do a lot out there, but this is home. Yeah, I know this more than I know anywhere else. I've done some international stuff in Scotland and I guess Italy, France, and Switzerland before, but that's about all I've ever done internationally. But it's hard to be here. I love the Smokies.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of people get lost in Oregon with the amount of rain they get.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When you lose the sun, good God.
Yeah.
Now, I've gone hiking in Italy and France, and it's very different from here. But so far to date, my favorite place that I've gone hiking was Texas. It was actually I would say within like an hour radius of Austin, because it's just very different. Being from New England, from my perspective now, being here for over 30 years, the woods kind of all look the same to me now here.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just oversaturation for me.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they really do look all the same up here. So when I went to Texas last year, we went down a dry riverbed, which I'm not even sure. I think it was just a part of the Colorado River that happened to be dry. And going through the riverbed and the cliff sides and the way that their hiking trails look compared to here, that was just amazing to me. And as someone who loves to hike, the hugeness of the outdoors in the West is just something I find amazing.
It is amazing. Yeah, I've yet to hike in Texas, but now you're piquing my interest. I'm going to have to get out there. I'd like to go to Big Bend, which I know is further, I guess, south than where you were. But yeah, I know there's treasures for sure.
Yeah, it was actually pretty hot out. So we actually cut it short because we had my two kids, and my wife and I decided to bring our nephew. He is 12 now. And we ended up cutting all of our hikes short every day we were there by like hours. We went out like a mile or two, and then the complaining would start about there's no pool here or video games.
I know those complaints well. Yeah.
I was gonna say, anyone who has kids nowadays, that's normal.
Yeah, it really is. It's a constant battle for sure.
Needless to say, there were threats about leaving people out there.
I love it.
I would recommend going to Texas, though. It's very different from anywhere else that I've hiked. We're actually going probably to Utah this summer. And if we have time, we're going to loop around to Northern California and come back.
Nice. Oh, you're going to get so saturated with Utah. I mean, not saturated as in you want to leave, but there's so much to see. You won't want to leave. You just go to those circuit of parks in the southern part of Utah, and you could spend a year down there. So, oh, you're going to have fun. It's a treasure.
Yeah, we try to go somewhere new like that every year. My kids have been to more states than most people that I know.
That's awesome. Do you guys drive out there, or do you fly?
Yeah,
and then...
My wife hates airplanes, and my ears don't work on an airplane, so we drive everywhere.
It works. No, I get it.
It's a long drive to Utah.
Yeah, it's more interesting. It's like National Lampoons every time we go.
There you go. No, I'm sure you'll have good stories. No, Utah's great.
Grizz, you guys tend to go on adventures too, right? You said you just pick a direction and go, don't you?
Yeah, we're always looking for new places to hike. And with the benefit of being up here, traveling to another state is an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever. It's not that big of a difference. It's not like, North Carolina driving from the coastline to the mountain areas is how long? Maybe 6, maybe 4 hours.
North Carolina, when I was in Raleigh, it was 4 hours to the coast.
Oh, you're talking about North Carolina. Yes, here it's 6 minimum. Yeah, but if you go to the Outer Banks, it's 8 to 9, I think. It's a long.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while. We're here, literally, I can cross a border in 5 minutes. It takes me an hour to do whatever. Yeah, we're always looking for all sorts of trails. Is there anything that you want to wrap up on before we finish the episode? Like any tips or anything?
Yeah, sure. So I just always like to end by saying, carry those 10 essentials, no matter how long or short the hike. That is imperative. Always leave an itinerary. That's, I would say, almost more important than the essentials, because if we don't know where to look for you, it prolongs everything for a long, long time, sometimes to people's detriment, really. And check the weather forecast. In the instance of that search that I was talking about earlier, if they had just known there was going to be this big snowstorm that came in, they may have thought a little more carefully about what they brought. Maybe not, because they thought they were going to be off trail that night, but they may have thought, maybe I'll put in an extra layer just in case. So those are the 3 things that I like to tell people, just always, always do. And if you can carry something like a personal locator beacon, like the Garmin InReach, there are a couple of other ones out on the market nowadays too. I just am partial to the InReach because it's what I have. Carry one of those too. It gives you that emergency SOS lifeline to the outside world if you don't have service, and if you have a life-threatening emergency or are just lost. It gives us that immediate connection to you to come find you a lot better, or a lot easier and quicker.
Yeah, those Garmin's are pretty good. Jerry and I use them because we do a lot of pre-pandemic we did a lot of rapids, whitewater kayaking, and having that GPS on you, even if you can't send out a signal, at least sending you in the right direction when you don't have a clue where you are is huge. And the biggest tip I ever got with that was bring an extra set of batteries.
Yes, For sure.
Someone always forgets, like, oh, I used this on my last trip, it should be fine. And then next thing you know, the thing's dead in your hand.
Yes. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And headlamps too. And a lot of people they think, oh, I've got a flashlight on my phone. There's my light source. No, definitely carry a backup light source. That's such an important thing. We go out and find so many people who could have made their way out had they had a battery for a headlamp or just a headlamp, period. So yeah, for sure. But yeah, if anybody wants to just find my website, I've got lots of outdoor education content that I've written over the years. It's almost always inspired by a search. And I come home and think, I'm going to write about that. So if somebody comes across this article, maybe they won't make the same mistake. But it's just my name, nancyeast.com. I did write a book about the Smoky's 900 speed record. And it has a lot of search and rescue stories sprinkled throughout it. And that's on my website too, if people are interested. It's called Chasing the Smoky's Moon, because we hiked just a shit ton really at night. So that's where we were always chasing the moon. We watched the whole thing go through its phases from the full moon, and then it cycled back to the full moon.
Oh, that's cool.
It was, yeah. We didn't even realize we were supposed to do the whole thing in 28 days instead of 29, but talk about a crazy search and rescue. Basically, there was a predatory attack on a hiker during our attempt at one of the campsites we were supposed to stay at. So we were short a day of this incident being in that same campsite. But it derailed everything for us. It was just a tragic, tragic thing for the park. It was only the second fatality in the park from a bear attack. But we wound up having to hike an extra day because the trail opened back up just before we were about to finish. So anyway, but yes, we were supposed to align everything with the lunar cycle, but we were a little bit off just from things we couldn't control.
What kind of bears do you get out there?
We just have black bears. It's not uncommon for bears to be very habituated and to harass people for food. They just get fed once and they say, a fed bear is a dead bear. And it's so true, because they almost always continue to just kind of stalk and harass people for food once they've gotten a handout from someone. And a lot of times it's innocent. People will feed the bear just thinking, I just want it to go away. If I just throw my candy bar at it, it'll leave me alone. But then that starts this cascade of, repeat offense. And then the bear usually winds up either being relocated or being euthanized in the situation of, if it attacks someone for food. And we don't know what happened. This was a backpacker who was very well versed in backpacking, a knowledgeable person, but was at a very remote backcountry site, but close to an area in the park where a lot of fishermen come in on boats and horseback and bring coolers and everything in the world, and are not always very responsible with it. So the bears have a very bad habit of being they misbehave in that area. So we think that it preyed on this man, probably in his tent is my guess. Who knows? But it was just horrible. It was just absolutely horrible. But it's only the second time in the history of the park that that's ever happened. So it's incredibly rare. I don't want to ever tell that story and people to think the Smokies are dangerous. They're really not. You just have to be bear smart and know also that it's a wild place and things happen sometimes. So, but yeah, that's all we have is black bear, but we have a ton of them. So it's.
I was gonna say, do you run into them pretty often?
Yeah, all the time, especially if I'm by myself. You're more quiet. I actually had one bluff charge me once from just kind of spooking it. I came around a bend and it didn't hear me until I was right on it. Kind of charged at me, but that's the only time I've ever had a weird encounter. Every other time, all I see is their butt as they're running away. So they're usually well behaved, but the closer you get to civilization or areas like that pocket where there's just repeat offenses of people not abiding by leave no trace principles, it can become a problem.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes from lack of education, which I advocate a lot, especially if you're going to be interacting with nature.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It's almost always ignorance. People just don't know what they don't know. And they just do things out of fear or just not knowing and thinking it's cute. And yeah, it can really harm wildlife in a tragic way.
It's just a big dog. Feed it. It'll be fine.
It'll be fine. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I actually just had a conversation about that with my wife about harming nature, because my daughter just got a cat who is now, I think, 5 months old. And we were talking about an indoor cat versus an outdoor cat. And she said she wanted an indoor cat because she doesn't want him to get killed we have coyotes, Fisher cats and everything. I said, he probably won't, but he'll kill every bird in the yard. Because what people don't realize is if you have an outdoor cat, the cat's not in danger as much as everything is in danger from your cat.
Absolutely. That was so true. Yeah. And I'm a retired veterinarian. So, yeah, I know all too well how much cats love to prey on little things.
Yeah. My dad had a cat when I was a kid, and all the time there were squirrel heads on the back step.
Oh, God. Yeah. And if people have a cat door, they get, all kinds of treats brought in through that. So,
now,
yeah.
Do you run into like mountain lions or anything like that out there?
We supposedly don't have them. There are plenty of people who know wildlife and I believe who have seen sightings of different, catamounts. And so I think that there are a few here and there that have either migrated from the West or they were pets, that probably weren't supposed to be pets and have escaped. Yep. But we don't have not anything like out West where they're in large numbers and it's their natural habitat. But yeah, we do have coyotes. They hardly ever bother anybody. We have elk now in the park, and they can certainly do some damage. And people underestimate the power and the speed of an elk all the time. So
yeah,
it's one to watch out for sure. It's kind of like moose up where you guys live. People never seem to understand how deadly a moose can be until they're dead.
The first time you see a moose, you're kind of first time I saw a moose, I understood I was not going to fuck with that animal ever. I was in a double-decker bus, and it was eye level with me, and I was like, nope, "Oh wow, I'm good. Screw this. That thing's a dinosaur. It ain't happening." Well, and if you've ever seen a car hit him, oh my God, it's like a semi.
Grizz, they hit cars. Cars don't hit them.
Yeah. Well, cars do hit them, but they hit back.
Yes.
But it's like a semi hit them things. Screw that. No.
Nancy, we want to thank you for being on the show. It's been fantastic and educational talking to you, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. It was an honor.
Well, what do you think, Riz? Could you hike almost 1,000 miles straight, taking almost no
one
breaks?
Day?
Well, no, it took her more than a day, but still. I think I'd lose interest after about 10 miles.
I don't know that I'd lose interest. I enjoyed hiking thoroughly. I'd probably be pretty fucking sore because I'd probably be pushing myself pretty hard, knowing that I have to hit these 900 miles in a month.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, me personally, I wouldn't hike that far, but it's pretty awesome that she did it.
No, I mean, dude, I love the outdoors. Put me out there every day. But I think about it. Fuck hiking in like snowy, wet shit.
Like I said in the episode, I don't go outside in the winter.
Dude, I like the cold. Like I really do. But those days, fuck that. You can't get warm.
I just had something I was going to say.
You don't mind Jerry. His brain is lost to the Rona.
It's true. I actually, when we were talking to her, she had mentioned telling somebody what your hiking plan was. I can't tell you how many times I went hiking and nobody had any clue that I had gone.
I don't think I've ever really told anyone, unless they were coming with me. I was never like, hey, just so you know, I'm going to hit this trail. But yeah. I also think where we live, our trails aren't as big.
Well, there are a couple trails I go to that if I fell off the cliff at the top, I would still be dead, even though they're not as big as the cliffs over there.
But then it doesn't really matter if anyone finds them.
You're right. Yeah. I guess for you to get really hurt here, it's catastrophic enough. You're probably dead already.
Yeah. You know?
But listeners, what'd you think? Let us know.
Thank you again for listening to Beautiful Bastards. New episodes every Monday. Remember to like and subscribe. Hiking is the answer. Who cares what the fuck the question is?
You had an actual hiking pool?
Yeah.
Not me. See you next week, guys.
What a bitch.